Hey everyone, welcome to Gamer Month 4. I've spent some more time on the game and developed the enemy AI, a cool finisher system where if an enemy's health is low, you can use a finisher move. This will give you health, and it creates a really cool effect in slow motion and this particle effect, then the enemy goes flying. This was inspired by Doom 2016, where you can basically finish an enemy if they're glowing, and health and ammo drops. I also put together a small level prototype so we can test out the combat. So the first system that I started adding in was the enemy AI. I wanted a very simple behavior for this game. So basically what enemies can do is that they can go idle, patrol, they can then detect the player and go into combat mode. I started with the idle and patrol. Those are the first two systems I pretty much always set up. And before I got into creating nodes, I had to set up my behavior tree and blackboard. So Unreal has an amazing system for AI called behavior trees. It's a great way to visualize the enemy AI and set up all the behaviors. At first I thought the system was complicated when I started using it a few years ago. It just seems a bit daunting at times to dive into some of the systems within Unreal, but if you're hesitating, I highly recommend just jumping in. It's so easy to create AI with the system and set up tasks and behaviors and visualize it. It's really good. So with this system in particular, I created a blueprint task, and this task was all about finding a random point in a reachable radius, and that's actually the node I used. So it basically just finds a vector that it could pathfind to in its radius, and I set the radius myself. The reason I did a random reachable radius is because I don't actually need precision patrol patterns, and what I mean by that is in Billy Construct or any stealth game, you have to have predictable AI routes. You need to be able to learn their patterns and then use that to your advantage. So for this game, it's all about combat that I'm making now. This game's all about combat. The patrol paths, they can be completely random. So when an enemy reaches their random patrol point, that vector, when they actually reach it and overlap with it, they will go into idle. And the great thing here is, there is a task called wait, and this will just make the logic stop for a few seconds, or whatever you set it to. It will kind of block it and wait. And because I've set up my blend space to use the enemy velocity, I don't have to play an idle animation or stop the enemy or do anything like that. I simply just use the blend space, and because it's waiting, its velocity is already at 0, since move to the random reachable location is not running. So that was really great and easy to set up. And once I had the patrol and idle all set up, I began working on detection. So Unreal has another component which is very useful called AI perception. And it's basically inbuilt code, and it has all this stuff for player detection and even things like sound and sight. For this game, I only need to use sight. So I focused on setting it up so the view radius was quite wide, and the distance is far, so enemies can see you when you're kind of moving around and flying. And I want enemies to be able to see you from a distance so they can begin just shooting at you. With the perception set up, I call a function, I believe that's called AI perception update target, and it just checks if it's sensed the player. And from there, you can tell the AI to just go straight into combat mode. Because it's all about fighting, I don't have to investigate an area or lose sight of the player basically. I can just say, hey, patrol, idle, and go fight the player. It's a very simple setup. So with this simple AI setup, I was able to begin playtesting straight away. The only extra thing that I set up was something called aim offset. So with blend spaces, as you found out in the last episode, or you probably already know, you can blend between movement. And aim offset allows you to blend between an enemy aiming up and down. So say the player is flying, the enemy will actually look up and shoot at the player. And it just feels so much better when the enemy actually looks at the player and shoots, as opposed to the enemy just looking around on ground level and projectiles magically fly up to the player. It actually feels like they're aiming and firing at you, which is great. The only extra thing I set up was auto fire on the player, so if you hold left click down, it will re-trigger the fire event. I was getting tired of spamming left click, so I wanted to make sure you could auto fire so your finger wouldn't get tired when you were playing the game. So I did my first playtest after I set up all the enemy AI, and it was really good. I gave the enemy HP and made it so my projectile could take their health away. I also added a radial force component, which I added in last time on the projectiles, and that's what makes everything kind of force push away. So there's an impulse that fires and everything gets blown away. And the reason I added this in was because it's way more fun when you take out an enemy and there's a visual result. And ragdolls are always entertaining, so I made it so the enemy would ragdoll and then get blown away by the radial force. With the basics of the game set up, I wanted to put together a very simple level, and I used the Supergrid starter pack. I always use this pack whenever I am prototyping. I love the color of the grids and how it looks. It's just so much nicer than the default Unreal texture. I'm so sick of the default Unreal texture. So I wanted to start an area where you could take on enemies, and you can fly if you want to. You're not forced to, you can just run around on the ground and take out all the enemies. But then I wanted a second section where you fly in order to get there, and that takes advantage of the hover system, and it also makes the player learn how to fly and shoot at the same time. With this setup, I also put little blocks around so you could actually take cover and hide behind the walls. At this point, I was really happy with the progress that I had been making. The AI was really fun to shoot at, and it was nice to have a level that you could move around. And I was considering that I would stop here and just make a YouTube video on this, but I had one other idea that I wanted to implement, and something I like to mess around with in Game a Month is to just try out random things. And I remembered the finisher system in Doom 2016, where you could basically take an enemy's health low, make them glow, and then use a finisher move. They're quite brutal, it looks really awesome. You could use a finisher move and you'll get ammo and health. And it's such a great system in order to get health back to the player. It really enforces the player to kind of push forward and keep on fighting. So I wanted to see what would happen if I implemented it in a game like this. Would I play a bit more aggressively and try to get closer to the enemies in order to regenerate health? And I ended up creating this finisher system. The finisher system was pretty straightforward to create. It required some simple logic, so in order to get it working, I want to kind of tell you the overall kind of pseudocode I came up with, and then I'll show you how I implemented it in blueprints. The logic is that you have to get a reference to an enemy near you, so you need maybe you need a sphere collider to check if you've overlapped with enemies, or maybe you want to do a trace, sphere trace. After you do that, whatever trace or overlap or collision check you do, then you want to see if the enemy's health is below a specific amount. And the reason you're checking if it's below a specific amount is because you only want to use the finisher move once they're weakened. Once you've checked that their health is below whatever amount you choose, so say you choose 35, you want to stop the enemy shooting, and you want to stop their movement logic, so they're kind of stuck in place. And once they're stuck in place, you also want to stop the player movement, or else they're going to be able to move around whilst they do the finisher move. Once all the inputs and enemy logic is stopped, play the animation you want for your finisher move. And make sure to cause full damage to an enemy's health, so they're taken out in one final hit, and increase your health by the amount you want. Alternatively, you could, make objects fly out of the enemy, but I made it so my health would increase by a certain amount. Keep in mind that I did try and create it in a way that would suit this game. It's a third-person game, so it's got third-person animations, and the timings, of course, will be different to Doom. So if you wanted something more faithful to Doom, you'd probably want to make it in first-person and try and copy what they did a lot more closely. My whole concept when I came up with this idea was just a system where you could freeze an enemy in place, do the kind of ultimate ability or finisher ability, and they would get blown away and you would get health back. There were 3 other things that I added to the system. The first thing that I added and I think this is really important, is you want a visual change for the enemy. So I made a simple emissive material that I could apply to the enemy. In the future I'd like to make something a bit more advanced, but for now the glow was perfect. The second was slow motion, and the reason I added slow motion is because I wanted it to feel like an epic moment. I want you to feel powerful and enjoy the result that you've caused. This was done with the global time dilation mode, which simply just slows down time. So you can set it to 0.2, add a delay, and set it back to 1. The third thing I added was a particle effect, and this was to visualize the powerful attack FaZe is using to destroy the enemy. This was fun to add in. In Doom, the Doom Slayer has really brutal animations, and that's how they really visualize the power of the Doom Slayer and what he's doing. Since I only had a week, I kept it simple. I just play an animation, and I put a really powerful looking particle effect in, and that was my way of selling how powerful the character is when they use this finisher move. With all of these features combined, the final gameplay looks like this. I'm really happy with the results of the game so far. I like the combination of gameplay elements that I'm creating this time around. My next goal is to put an enemy model in. Not sure what it will be. If you have any Paragon recommendations, let me know. The other thing I want to add in is an environment and a simple objective for the player to complete so I can tie up the overall experience. I've been working on this a few hours during specific days of the week. My main focus is the VR project that I'm developing for work, but it's been really great to take some of my free time and put it into my own creative project. I'm really enjoying Game a Month at the moment. If you'd like to join in the future, I'm considering starting an itch.io page, just a monthly game jam. So it's not a game jam per se. It's just if you want to do Game a Month with me, we can submit our games on there, submit progress, maybe write in the comments section and on my Discord if you'd like to do this kind of thing and just have a small creative project outside of what you might do for work or whatever that you're doing. Maybe you actually just want to do Game a Month full time for a few months, I'm not sure. But let me know what you think of that idea and if you'd like to join in. I've put a build of the game up on itch.io. I'm using a great service called Butler, and it basically updates the game with changes I make, so it's kind of like patching it. I just run it through command prompt, and I upload the zip, and it will only upload specific files. So this is much better than the old way I used to do it, just going on itch.io and re-uploading. And it doesn't have the same size restrictions, so if my game gets over a gigabyte, I don't think it's a problem, according to what I read. I've also added a link to our Discord channel in the description below, so if you want to join a community of game developers, feel free to click on that. And if you want to be notified of any future videos I create, make sure to press subscribe, and you'll get notifications. The last thing that I wanted to cover were that you guys wrote a lot of questions for the Q&A. I was just going to do a little section at the end of this video to do a small Q&A, but I might go and do a Q&A video. So in the past, I used to do indie Q&A videos and they were quite fun. So I'm probably going to prepare that for you so you could watch it either this week or next week. And if you have any questions, feel free to write them on any video. I'd love to see if I could add some value and help answer them. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it valuable. I will see you all in the next video.